Had he been able to show the whole thing here, it would have been perfect lead into what I wanted to talk about. Because I have had 3 tours over there. 2 combat tours and then another tour. And I want to give you a perspective. And I've given this talk before. I've given it to the Rotary and I've given it to the Anthem Ranch veterans, and I've gotten really good feedback on it. Not because of me necessarily, but the information that's being advanced to you. So let me start by knocking something over in this space that I've got here. He wanted me to give some background on me, and I don't want to do too much of that because you've got my bio in the thing, but he even asked me why I went into the service and give you some insights about that. I grew up in Ypsilanti, Michigan. I went to school there, educated there, and I left in 1960 when I went to the service. The reason I joined the Army is I was there alive at the tail end of World War II. Where's the other World War II vet? Right here. And I was a kid, and I would get Kix breakfast boxes. Because on the back of those boxes, you could cut it out and make a tank, or you could make a Jeep. Does anybody remember those things? And then my dad had served at Vichy in World War II. That's in France, Alsace-Lorraine. He won a Bronze Star, V device, and when you're a grunt, if you get a Bronze Star and a V device, you probably did something that's worthy at least of a Silver Star. You know that. So anyway, he had a great Eisenhower jacket, and I couldn't wait till I was old enough to grow into that jacket. And he had on his sleeve, Sons of Bitchy, right here. And I was so proud to wear that when I was a kid, and I somehow lost it. But he also fought, he was in the 100th Division, and later in the war, and really helped liberate, and then he was in the occupying forces. So that's my beginning. I also went to a military school for a couple of years, and I was the tallest guy in the class, and so I got to be a squad leader, and then I got to be a platoon leader, and so that's what started it. I got my commission through ROTC, had a regular Army commission offered to me, turned it down. I was married, had kids, and didn't make enough money to afford the $300 uniform allowance that you have to get uniforms, so I went in the reserves. And later was commissioned regular Army, integrated regular Army, and went over to Germany in the Armor branch with 1st Battalion, 64th Armor. Well, let's get to the topic at hand. Had we been able to see this right here, you'll know that the involvement has been protracted in Vietnam. We've been involved for a long time. In fact, the first casualty in Vietnam, can anybody estimate or take a guess at when that occurred? 56? Sooner, older than that. 45. 45. As part of the Operation of Special Services, Bulldog so-and-so, can't remember his name, had a lieutenant colonel over there who was working undercover, and he was mistaken for a French officer in Saigon and taken out. So he was the first casualty in 1945. We got seriously involved, as you know, in the 60s. But there was an involvement in 54 that a lot of us don't know about, and that was the American Navy, the U.S. Navy, evacuating Catholics, French Foreign Legion soldiers who were trapped up there after Dien Bien Phu. And he wasn't the commander of the ship, but Rob Winfrey, a good friend of mine, was involved in that in 1954. So he tells me, what do you think you're doing? What do you think you're talking about? You don't know what it was like back then. Anyway, I'm glad to have you here, Rob. So let's get on with this. I say look back on 3 tours to give you an overall perspective, but let's get started in this thing and get to the issues. First tour. This is the trip over. Remember that? I mean, what a way to go to war. Bringing coffee and drinks down the aisle. But that's the way we went, and that's the way we came back on chartered ships or aircraft, except for units that were deploying in a hole, like the 11th Cav deployed and landed at Vung Tau, which is down here. I'm sorry, right there. a lot of us just flew over. It was a little bit of a getting adjusted to it all, I can tell you that, because one of my perspectives is I landed in Saigon, Tan Son Nhut, took a bus to Long Binh. Anybody been to Long Binh before? You go through your orientation there, you get equipped to go, but if you were as prepared as I was, you weren't prepared. You weren't prepared. I'd come out of the career course in 1966, went to jungle school to somehow get ready for that little trip, but I still wasn't prepared. Nonetheless, I got a command. I got a I Troop, 3rd Squad in 11th Cavalry. We flew to the operations base in this Caribou, and all of a sudden there I am. This is what I got into. Let me tell you a little bit about this, and I'm not going to run the whole thing, but let me give a perspective. Is the volume okay on that?
Could go up.
While it's on, and when there's not talking, that's what we did. We busted jungle, road security, search and destroy operations in 3 Corps. 3 Corps is down at the bottom of Vietnam, down in here. Prominent names, Cu Chi, Tay Ninh, Swan Loc, those names. I don't know if they're familiar to any of you, that's what we were. This is the reason I can't hear anything, like a lot of you. There's a little run into this. Most of that's real footage. Some of it's training footage, but a lot of it's real footage.
The Black Horse Regiment, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, were moved to Vietnam.
Can you get the volume up?
The natural barriers and unfamiliar terrain.
What, on mine? Oh.
But surprisingly, American mechanized
Oh, sorry.
units surmounted these obstacles through ingenuity and sheer determination.
That's good.
Turn the lights now.
Yeah.
And it takes determination, especially when you can't see what's ahead, even 10 feet away. A jungle might seem like a strange place for armored vehicles that can cover hundreds of miles per day in open country. Yet when the enemy can be anywhere, armor means a lot to the foot soldier. Armor helps the soldier beat a path. Armor means firepower, that extra wallop that keeps the enemy from concentrating his forces. Today's mechanized cavalry means mobility and speed, a prime requirement of modern warfare. Since their arrival in Vietnam, the cavalry troopers of the Black Horse Regiment have built a proud record of accomplishment while fulfilling their military missions. Under unique battlefield conditions never before encountered by mechanized ground forces, they built a record of leadership, of ingenuity, spirit, and valor that will always live in the annals of the 11th Armored Cavalry in Vietnam. New ways to do old jobs had to be found, and these men were equal to the task. The 3rd Corps area where the regiment was assigned contains the capital of South Vietnam, Saigon, important cities such as Binh Hoa and the Rice Bowl provinces. It also included strategic areas such as the Elephant's Ear and the trackless jungles of the Cambodian border. As an independent force in this vital area, the 11th Armored Cavalry gave needed support to elements of U.S. and Allied forces. Immediately after arrival at the port of Vung Tau in September 1966, the regiment moved to the important headquarters base of Long Binh for staging. Then onward to Xuan Loc and the creation of its own base camp.
Does that bring it back?
The regiment was welcomed by General Creighton Abrams, later commander of all U.S. forces in Vietnam. He discussed equipment and organization with Colonel Cobb, the regiment's first commander in Vietnam. At the conclusion of his welcoming visit, General Abrams was impressed with this vital new fighting team. The familiar armored personnel carriers had been beefed up for the counterinsurgency mission in Vietnam. Each vehicle was fitted with 2 additional machine guns, and modification of armor gave crewmen greater protection. The crew of 5 men included the vehicle commander, driver, grenadier, and gunners. The result was the Armored Cav Assault Vehicle, or ACAV, the key vehicle of the new light armored platoons. After it had been proved in combat, the ACAV was soon employed in other units throughout Vietnam. Heavier armor, typified by the M48 tank, provided each squadron with a big punch.
Searchlights didn't last very long over there.
The armored vehicle with the 11th is the Sheridan. It mounts a 152mm gun, which also launches the Shillelagh missile. Artillery was also part of the squadrons. It was assigned to individual units in whatever mix the commander required. In the days ahead, artillery support would prove to be a valuable asset. At first, the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment was equipped with self-propelled 105mm howitzers. Later, these were to be replaced by 155mm howitzers, which had greater range. Became a completely mobile reconnaissance and striking force. They became the only freewheeling armored unit of its kind in combat in Vietnam. Within its squadrons were custom vehicles and special purpose weapons, such as heavy mortars capable of devastating fire, and highly trained mobile advisory scouts. A Thunder Horse troop of air cavalry. Within 3 weeks of arrival, units of the 11th had met the enemy, beginning with a fight for the regiment's line of communication. The Viet Cong had plenty of warning as the long lines of armor rolled down the roads and into the northern sector of the core area. Friendly observers reported the enemy was rising to the bait, preparing ambushes. In Operation Atlanta, the men of the 11th routed the ambushes with overwhelming firepower, taking a heavy toll in enemy dead and captured. Many of the enemy's weapons were seized. Best of all, the Viet Cong learned respect for the regiment at the outset. Long Kong province were free again. This initial success made the task easier. As the Black Horse base camp began to grow, its resupply and security gained importance. Headquarters became a hub of activity. Everywhere the camp was being developed into a comfortable main base, even though a large part remained under canvas. Communications were an important reason for the camp's existence. Powerful electronics equipment at the Tactical Operations Center allowed full communications with higher headquarters at Long Binh, and with field units which had mobile armored command posts. When in position, these field units were made secure against enemy night raids. Concertina wire encircled the area. During daylight hours, these forward outposts were busy centers of planning and direction. In all, this communications network proved an outstanding support for the troopers in the field. Fanning out from the base, armored convoys patrolled the area and protected vital supply lines as they kept the roads open. Often an armored patrol guarded an important junction or other strategic point. After long hours of patrolling far from their base, men and vehicles would pull off the road to rest. During these short periods of respite, however, the alert troopers never wandered very far from their vehicles. Purely and simply, this was enemy country. For days at a time, they were on duty 24 hours a day.
Yeah, good. I didn't want to take too much time with this, but just wanted to give you a perspective on what it was like. You know, kind of what it was like. Within 3 days of landing and getting processed through Long Bin, I became a commander of one of those troops. And I asked some others in here, were you prepared? And the answer is no. Here I'm commanding a cavalry troop with 28 of those ACAVs that you saw with the 50 calibers and the 7.62 machine guns, and 130 troops, and attached tanks from time to time. 3 days after I landed in Long Bin, I was a commander of I Troop. The previous commander had been wounded, and I had pure evidence of that because right through the tank commander, or the cav cupola, was a round where an RPG came through here and went out here, and he was standing here. So we had 3 successive losses of I Troop commanders from 1966 when they landed until 1967 when I took command of I Troop. I'm going to just say the regiment was a powerful force. It really was, in fact, and well trained and in demand. And other divisions that began to come into country wanted a part of the troop, or part of the squadrons, and we broke it up a little bit. That was very disappointing because we wanted to operate as a regiment, not as a group of troops and squadrons out there. Well, that didn't happen. My pace of operations was down here in the Saigon area, 3 Corps it was called, and I put little red marks on here where the operations were that I was involved in, and the whole squadron, 3rd Squadron, was involved in. And lots of combat, lots of small arms engagements and things like that. No major offenses, no major casualties. We did a road march out, let me say around the 3rd of July, up Highway 20 to do some road security, route security, etc. And that was my first taste. And thankfully there wasn't any action on that first taste, because just trying to get out and establish a base of operations out in the jungle is a little nerve-wracking. Luckily nothing happened on that one, but we were out there for 2 weeks doing search and destroy, and then we came back into the base camp that you saw up there. The big deal was in July 21st, when the whole squadron, that's a squadron, I Troop, K Troop, L Troop, and M Company, that's a tank company, and a howitzer battery, and covered with gunships and scouts from our Delta Troop. Hit a major ambush. I was the 2nd troop in line. K Troop was the first one. And K Troop took 14 kill in action on that day. We tried to negate the ambush. It was an L-shaped ambush, came around and took them under fire and began to rout them. But the big deal was when the fire jets came in and the gunships came in, and the KIAs that we counted and had bodies for were 94. So we lost 14, but we killed 94. What's the purpose of body count? Anybody remember those days?
Score.
Yeah, that's how you keep score. And that's how the big guys, you know, the generals, Westmoreland and President Johnson and the rest of them, determine how it goes. You ever think that there might have been some exaggeration in those body counts?
Both ways.
Probably so. Probably so. You said both ways. Most of us tried to play it straight, and we just didn't want to exaggerate it, so we would report what we actually did, and the troops were pretty loyal to the mission and not trying to exaggerate things. However, in the Army, and probably the Navy and the Air Force, there are political issues as well. And the higher rank you go, the more political it becomes. My squadron commander landed in a base camp that we had just secured, a Viet Cong base camp, captured a lot of weapons and rice and all that kind of stuff, and several KIAs, and we didn't lose anybody. He landed with his sergeant major and went up and saw the bodies, saw the rice, etc. This is going to surprise you and it'd be shameful. As he was leaving, he said, "Write me up for the Distinguished Service Cross." Are you kidding me? For landing in an area that had already been secured? That fellow went on to be a 3-star general. I didn't write him up. Nonetheless, that's what happened. So that's a little shameful. But let me say, without criticizing great extent of our effort in Vietnam, I was very proud to serve there, very proud to serve with the 11th Armored Cav, and we did make a difference. Here's why we were there. This shows what the 1965 plan was for the NVA. They wanted to cut the country in half. But they were also hitting down here in 3 Corps and up here in I Corps. And I know there's a Marine here who was up there in I Corps. I don't know if he was there at the time. But that was their plan. And of course they came to this by coming down what amounted to a 15-mile wide Ho Chi Minh Trail. Everybody thinks it's a trail. It's not a trail. It was a huge way to infiltrate and come down into Saigon area and just not be, they'd be protected. They were in Cambodia and we weren't supposed to do that. Anyway, that's where I was. And talking about the operations, find the bastards and pile on was our model. George S. Patton IV was the regimental commander who created that motto. Find them and pile on. If you can get to them, kill them, just like his dad. So I operated there from last part of June, early July to October, thereabouts, and was wounded. This is not the track, but that's what it looked like. Got hit on an ambush near Din Quan, which was a ways up from our operations base. We were doing road security, and roam plows were cutting back the jungle on each side of the road so there wouldn't be ambushes. Where's Mike? He knows about what the roam plow operations are all about. Big bulldozers that took down the sides of the jungle along major convoy routes for security. That's all we were trying to do, is secure that area, eliminate the Viet Cong threat, push them back and get them away from Saigon, and begin to bring the South Vietnamese army up to speed. That was the mission. This is 67 when I got hit, but let me tell you a little bit about the buildup. And maybe many of you know this, but in 65, there were more than 16,000 advisors. There were 184,000 troops. 1st Cav, the 173rd Airborne Brigade, a battalion of Marines. We were really starting to build it up, and the entire intent was to secure the area so that the Vietnamese people could live their lives. And there were political reasons, of course, but guys on the ground, they didn't know about that. We were just trying to do what's right. The buildup continued, but let me tell you, in 1965, at one point, there were more protesters than there were troops in Vietnam. And the protesters also grew to a peak of 200,000 in 1 year protesting Vietnam. The troops buildup went 184,065 up to 389 by the end of 66. 389,000 by the end of 66. The year I was there, it was up to 463,000. 68 was 495, and then the peak was 69. But as the peak approached in terms of buildup, we were getting threatened by back home people, the Jane Fondas of the world, even the Beatles, Joan Baez. And there was so much pressure that we began to return units back to the States in the middle of a buildup, in the middle of a winning time. Obviously, there were some problems. That's just showing you a couple more of our vehicles. This is the 1970 or 68 Tet offensive that's been well written up by Ed Misio on the back of, or on that second page of the program. I don't need to talk too much more about Tet, except to tell you this: we won. The media didn't portray that. They portrayed it as a major loss because we were surprised and didn't know about the buildup. But we did. And of course, in order to react, you had to deploy forces to counter that attack from different parts of Vietnam. But we won. We secured Saigon. The Marines had a hell of a battle up in Hue, up here. I mean, just a hell of a battle. They had a lot of casualties, but they also took a lot out. Bottom line for that 1968 Tet offensive for me is we won. I wasn't in Tet of 68 because after I got wounded in October of 67, I spent 3.5 months in hospitals, Japan, the whole string of things. I'm getting dry mouth here. Am I nervous or am I just talking too much? Let me tell you a little bit about the evacuation cycle because this will give you a marvelous perspective on what we had over there. I was hit, as I said, in Din Quan. One of my guys was killed and 3 others wounded. And we're all, trying to make the best of it. So there's a medevac call. Medevac got in, I'd say, within a half an hour. The medevac ship was there. Medevaced us back. Sergeant Hughes was KIA, he was on the floor. Medevaced us back to the 93rd Medical Hospital, evacuation hospital. That's where you get debrided of any wounds you may have received, and they'll leave scars all over your body depending on how many wounds you got. From there you go to the 7th Surgical Hospital, that was near Saigon, and that's where they try to put you back together and begin the process to get you to where you need the real care. It's beyond their capabilities, then you're sent over to Japan. And that's where I went. And I spent 3.5 months there getting rehabilitated for shrapnel wounds throughout most of the body. I asked the medic who was treating me on the ground in Vietnam to check me out. He said, I am, sir. I said, no, I mean, check me out. He said, what do you mean? Pardon me, ladies. I said, check out my balls. He said, they're all there. All 4 of them, or whatever. Anyway, that's it. I come back after the stay in the hospital, and I was given an opportunity to be evacuated home. But I had to go home in my pajamas. Didn't want to do that. Didn't want to go home in pajamas. So I stayed and went back to Nam to finish my tour. When I came back, I got a staff assignment at Long Binh with the U.S. Army Vietnam, and didn't like it, but that's what I had to do for the last 4 months, 5 months of my tour. That's when I got acquainted with General Patton. He hadn't yet taken command of the regiment. He wasn't the commander when I was there. Anyway, you have to have Army headquarters, you have things to do, and I worked in operations for the last 5 months. After Tet. And by the way, I was in Tet, but I was in a barracks behind barbed wire without a weapon. And thankfully nothing happened. This is going home. That's the end of Tour 1. And we got back on these 707s and went on home. Went back to the States. Some of us went back well received. Some of us went back and weren't so well received. You probably remember those days. When I went back, I went to, I'm not going to talk about Tour yet, but I went back to an ROTC assignment in Lawton, Oklahoma, a small college, Cameron College. They had a huge ROTC enrollment. So we had a pretty big staff. I mean, that's Oklahoma. That's, you know, the red blood of America right there, in Texas and New Mexico, places like that. We had a great enrollment of ROTC cadets. As Vietnam was building up, and during the middle of it, this was from 68 to 71, unfortunately there was the lottery draft. Anybody remember the lottery draft? And if you had a high number, you were going. I mean, if you had a low number, you were going. If you had a high number, you probably weren't going to go. Well, the cadets in our ROTC department began to dwindle as they got low draft numbers and pulled out. Well, we didn't need so many cadre there at Lawton, so in 1971, I said, I'm out of here. And I said, I'd like to go back, volunteer to go back for Tour 2. Let me tell you a little about Tour 2. Is this okay the way it's going here? Yeah. Okay. I'm talking a lot, I know that. Didn't want a staff job. Some of you know what that's all about. So I asked for a command job. Well, there weren't any American troops there to command. So I wound up being an advisor to the 18th Armored Cavalry Regiment. We started out in 3 Corps down here. And so I wound up being an advisor to a squadron commander. They were actually squadron-sized units, but they called them regiments. My commander was Buey von Locke, and you'll see a picture of him in a minute. We did operations similar to what the 11th Cav had done in 3 Corps, because they kind of inherited the action there as we began to pull out. By 71, they were on their own. And we had lots of operations in here, Tay In. And the Vietnamese Army wasn't restricted in terms of going into Cambodia. So we had lots of operations in Cambodia as well, because that's where the NVA, all along the border here, had encamped herself to take over for the VC that were being pretty well decimated. I mean, there were a lot of VC left, but the NVA came in to play a major role. A lot of operations there, road security, jungle bust and search and destroy, and that kind of stuff. And that's what they did from about August to March of 72. In March of 72, things changed. March of 72, the spring offensive took place in Vietnam because the NVA had built up so much inside the border of Laos and also Cambodia. And their strategy was, again, to cut the country in half, but to attack from the mountain regions, etc., along to the beaches. The Vietnamese army was deployed along here, which you can see, I know it's tough to see, deployed more than just along the side here. I was part of that. They loaded up my whole squadron, wasn't mine, but I mean the one I advised it, loaded them up on LSTs. I don't know how many, but when you're loading up 50 ACAVs and 12 tanks and everything else, that's a lot of equipment. But we went by sea all the way up to Hue Phu Bai, which is right about here, and offloaded, and we did a road march up to the DMZ because the NVA had really seriously deployed their forces there. We did our operations there. As the action really came on, it went the wrong way. There were no U.S. troops up here except advisors. It was all ARVN. And although they were good fighters, they were overwhelmed, and they began a massive retreat. And that just paved the way for the NVA to get even farther. They had 120 millimeter guns that could fire all the way into Quan Tri. That's where I was. I was telling my buddy Rob, there's not much protection from artillery when you're in the jungle, except you might get an early explosion, and then you got shrapnel coming down all over you. I was fortunate enough to be an advisor to an armored unit that have tracks that I could get in. And that's how, let's save my bacon. Anyway, he saw the writing on the wall. Really, really did. I mean, everybody was retreating. My commander, Buey von Locke, had won 2 Silver Stars in previous engagements. He had been fighting that war for 20 years by this time. And he was a brave man. Well, he turned to me and said, this is a day we might die. And I said to him, the last time I read about that was when I read a story about Sitting Bull, who said, this is a good day to die. And I said, no, I don't think it's a good day to die. There was no day that's a good day to die. But the reason was we couldn't go anywhere. Route 1, let me see what this next one is. No, it's got to stay here. Route 1, which was a 2-lane highway, and the main road all the way from Saigon all the way up to Hanoi in the old days, that was the main road. It's a 2-lane highway. The bridges are 2 lanes. There are lots of rivers there. And you can't widen the road without taking out the bridges. With all the artillery coming in and the NVA tanks coming across the border and the ARVN troops rather being routed, this was the only safe road to go down. Except when you get 2, 3, 4, 5,000 civilians on that road trying to get out with carts and kids and all that kind of stuff. That route became about 6 or 8 lanes wide. It was a great target for the NVA, and it was. And there was a lot of them killed, a lot. At every bridge, it was jammed up because the NVA wanted to destroy the bridge or target the bridges. So it was a rout, it truly was. And after Buey von Locke said it might be the day we die, I said, let's try to escape and evade and get out of here. I learned that in jungle school. It's a big term. It ain't easy to do, but let's get out of here. Just about the time we were going to pull out and head back, we got a call from U.S. Vietnam headquarters, USAV headquarters, not USAV, I'm sorry, MACV, to pull the advisors out of Quan Tri. And there were a lot of advisors there because there were a lot of ARVN units surrounding there. Well, the command was to get out of here. What do you think that does to the Vietnamese armed forces when they take the commanders out, or the advisors out? Doesn't work. But that's what happened. So 2 big Jolly Green Giants came in, landed where they could around the devastated citadel of Quan Tri, and packed up. I didn't go. And I don't want to pretend that I'm a hero about this, but I said I just can't do that. I just can't get on the airplane and take off, or the helicopter and take off. Well, it's probably a good choice, because as those helicopters were taking off, one of them was shot down. I don't know the number of casualties, but it had to be 30 or 40 casualties because they had a lot of capability there. My op sergeant, who was in the track with me and Buey von Locke, Colonel Block, said, we should go, we should go. Now, he wasn't a coward at all. He just said, we should go. There's no hope. I said, we're going to stay. He said, oh, shit. Well, what we did, and it worked out. I was a pretty good map reader. And I said, let's just go cross country. We got some streams we got to cross. We got the capability of doing that. So let's go. And we did. Came up over a ridge, and wham! An NVA tank fired on our vehicle. We were leading the pack as we were trying to rout it out. This is the flag that I took off that vehicle when we knocked it out. I got this flag, and it's signed and autographed by Buey von Locke. I also got a China Column 9mm pistol, if you know what that is, and it was still in Cosmoline. You know what that is? That meant these guys weren't any better prepared than we were, but they had the advantage and they pressed the fight. This PT-76 was amphibious. It could get down the streams and get behind us. And that was the only one that we really encountered as we went on through a bunch of rice paddies, took an 8-mile route to evacuate back down to, anybody in the 101st by any chance? Camp Evans was on Highway 1. And that's where we got to, and it was secure enough for us. The 101st was long gone, but it was secure enough for us to get out of the direct fire and indirect fire and regroup. We had lost all of our tanks. We had one left. We probably had 6, 7 APCs left. But we also had about 5,000 Vietnamese civilians who walked through the rice paddies with us to get out of there. And that route, they just took a chance to come with us because Route 1 wasn't the way to go. So that's about May 2nd, May 3rd, after 7 or 8 days of intense combat and firing at artillery fire and trying to make sense out of it all. I was called back to Saigon to brief and give my opinion on whether or not we could ever take that back. And I said, we're going to need a new tank battalion. We're going to need that. Well, lo and behold, we started flying in M48 tanks to Da Nang, and we got 50 new tanks. So I went back up there. I was in Saigon at the time, and I went back up to Da Nang where they came in and met up with my my counterpart. This is one of the PT-76s that was destroyed on the way out. This is my advisor, the advisor I served, Julie von Locke. I sure don't know whatever happened to him. I'm sure he's passed. Anyway, from Da Nang, we got these tanks. We road marched up the road. We had to bore sight and zero the tanks, get them ready for a fight. And we did that. And when you go from Da Nang, let me pick it out, here, and up the road to Hue, not up the road, it's about a 30-mile road march with 50 tanks, and we did restore it. We did take it back, got all the way back to the DMZ. I wasn't a part of that action because I had gone home by that time, but in September, Quang Tri was occupied by the ARVN armies, and so it looked pretty good. But what was happening, one other thing about this evacuation here, there were ammunition dumps and all that kind of stuff. We had to take that out. So I had the privilege of calling in an arc light on that ammo dump. You know what an arc light is? B-52 strike. If you've been within 5 miles of B-52 strike, you know what that's about. Because you're just bouncing and bouncing and bouncing, and your ears are going crazy because all secondary explosions in there. But what that did is deprive the NVA of a resupply of ammunition. So I'm out of the action by this time, and I'm not pretending that I was doing anything. I was on my way home. As I left, I had to tell you I had some feelings about that. Because this guy had to stay and fight. As the U.S. Army pulled out, unit by unit by unit, by the time I was there in late 72, there were probably 50,000 troops left, and those are mostly support and advisors, because we really scaled down pretty quickly. Well, we didn't prepare the South Vietnam sufficiently. We just didn't. We gave them equipment, not spare parts, didn't have the resupply for them. We tried to regroup and retrain, et cetera, but we left the South Vietnamese in a tough position. Had we stayed and had Richard Nixon kept linebacker operating, linebacker was, remember that term? Linebacker 1, linebacker 2. That was when Richard Nixon said we're going to bomb the hell out of them, and we're going to do it at the DMZ. If that doesn't work, we're going to do it in Haiphong and Hanoi. And they did. And here's a little comment about that whole thing. Well, maybe I can find it. Yeah. Had we stayed and kept bombing for 2 more days in December of 72, the war would have ended in a different way. This is General Jepp, who was the commander of NBA forces. I won't read you the whole thing, or maybe I will, it's pretty short. We still don't understand why you Americans stopped bombing Hanoi. You had us on the ropes. If you had pressed a little harder, just another day or two, we were ready to surrender. It was the same time as the Battle of Tet. It was the same at the Battle of Tet. You defeated us. but the American press didn't portray it that way. You knew we had defeated them. I mean, we knew you had defeated us, and the troops on the ground knew that as well. We were elated. This is still General Japp talking. We were elated. This is in a biographical book that he wrote. We were elated to notice that your media was helping us. They were causing more disruption in America than we could in the battlefields. We were ready to surrender. You had won. Those are his words. He published his memoirs and confirmed what most Americans knew. The Vietnam War was not lost in Vietnam. It was lost at home. That's continuing even today, in my words. So, let's go back and talk about 2 or 3 and lighten this up a little bit. Oh, this shows what began to happen in 75, and you should know this, and maybe you already do. In 75, the NVA had built up to such a degree, and the ARVN South Vietnamese troops were so depressed and ill-equipped, and etc., that a multiple attack in 75 wound up with the NVA routing the South Vietnamese yet again and taking the capital of Saigon. And you all recall the pictures of the embassy being evacuated and all of that. I'm sure my friend Buey von Locke fought as hard as he could, but I'm sure he didn't make it out of that. So, after 75, well, not much coverage about Vietnam. Sometime later, an important person in my life said, let's go to Vietnam. Let's go back. I said, I don't need to go back to that. I mean, I don't mean about bad memories. I said, I have already been there. That's what my wife doesn't like. Because if I've been there, I don't want to go back. And she's got places she wants to go. So we took a tour. And it was a wonderful tour. Give you some of the ideas. This is Quan Tri, the only structure standing, and that's a school right outside of Quan Tri at one time, and it became a VC headquarters. You can see the flag. That was all that was standing when we were there. We took pictures of it. This is a picture of me with 2 vets, Viet C, that were the hosts and guardians of a North Vietnam cemetery. What the hell? It's over. So I just pat him on the back. And through our interpreter and tour guide, one of them explained that he had been in the fight for Quan Tri. And I said, congratulations. You eventually lost it, though. Anyway, this is a Marine tank that got taken out by the DMZ. Still there on display. This is in Hanoi, because our itinerary took us to Hanoi first, and then Haiphong, and then on down Vietnam. This is at the museum in Hanoi that I went and visited. Took a couple hours to stay there. There was a propaganda museum. It really was. I mean, there's a picture even of John Kerry in there, your current Secretary of State. In the role that he played in those days, there's pictures and letters from Jane Fonda, Joan Baez, and other things. And some of the things they would say, I mean, did you know there were 230 U.S. Navy ships lost in Vietnam? Who's in the Navy here? And there's another guy wearing a uniform. Do you think there were 230 ships lost in Vietnam? Not even close. How many ships do you think were lost in Vietnam? That's what the NVA say. Not at all. No close. I can't claim it because I didn't know, but it was propaganda. Well, we went on through this tour. Saw this. I didn't like it, but we were there. This is a cemetery where these 2 Viet Cong, ex-Viet Cong, were the guardians of, or the caretakers of. There's North Vietnam cemeteries all over Vietnam, even in the south. This was right outside Hanoi, but even in the south. There are no cemeteries for South Vietnamese soldiers. None. If there were, they were destroyed by the NVA. There's no recollection or memory. As Vietnam military capitulated in 75, you know that a whole lot of folks had to go to retraining. And they were retrained in atrocious conditions. Many of them died there, but they had to be re-educated, etc., to come out and accept their lot in life in South Vietnam. I got some other interesting pictures here. This is our tour guide and his mother, and this is Cu Chi. This woman, who was probably a homeopathic doctor of some kind, but had medical experience, was drafted by the NVA in the early days. Her husband was a soldier in South Vietnamese Army. She was drafted to be a doctor. In the course of the 4 or 5 years that she was in those tunnels, she learned how to amputate arms and legs and do serious medicine for the Viet Cong. In fact, she spent 4 or 5 years in the tunnels. Well, that was interesting, and this guy was a delight. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jackie, but his father served and came back, and I think this fellow must have been conceived after he came out of the camp, because he was a relatively young guy. That's my take on it, but his father eventually was killed, not killed, just passed away. We went into the tunnels. This is a VC coming out of one of the tunnels. She happens to be sitting right here in the front row. So this lady went 3 levels down. They got smaller and smaller and smaller, and I'm a little claustrophobic. I couldn't go down 3 levels. I went down 2 levels and couldn't wait to get out of the damn thing. And about a half an hour later, she comes out. Of course, this is a memorial about Vietnam. It summarizes my whole talk. I hope I'm able to convey to you that we surely did our job. We surely did. Would have won it with a little more endurance and a little more support from home, but it wasn't there. And so for political reasons, we pulled out. Made a mess of it, but that's what happened. Questions, comments, anything? That concludes my presentation. Any questions?
Cocktail hour.
Huh?
Cocktail hour, right?
Jeez, don't be. Anyway, my mouth is so dry.
There's another one down there.
Yeah, I see it.
I have a question, Matt.
Sure, yeah.
What is your assessment of the Army? Are they as portrayed?
Well, you know, they have been fighting since the French, and the VC began to build up in the late 50s. So the South Vietnamese Army had to be brought up to speed to do it. In the early days, when we were advising them, there were a couple of hundred advisors in there, but that began to build up. And the South Vietnam Army was a pretty solid group. They had a nice, very capable Air Force in the early days, very capable troops. But as everything dragged on, the war dragged on, I mean, that's all they did. It was fight. They went home once in a while. Billy Von Locke, as the regimental commander, was in a position of leadership, and he could bring his wife to the field if he wanted to. And he did that one time in Hue, and I met her. She's a charming lady. We went out on the Perfume River and had a nice little dinner out there. So they tried to integrate their whole life into the situation they were in. And as the VC had built up around Saigon and 3 Corps and along the border, along the trails, it just became increasingly impossible. You know, we bombed the hell out of the trails. We just did. But that didn't stop them. They kept coming down. There was, Ho Chi Minh was a pretty inspiring leader for the North Vietnamese. Yes, sir.
Let me just add, you know, early on, the South Vietnamese Army suffered from the problems of many post-colonial structure. You have good men down to the lower level, but your senior leadership was more politically appointed. You know, as we got more into the war, you know, once President Pugh got on there and stuff, the political stuff got, you know, cleaned out. You became much more professional. But I think one of the problems too is once we had our massive buildup, our attitude was kind of shuttle them off to the side. We'll take over, son. You know, we have all the equipment. And also, you know, the replacement of lost equipment and stuff, we got the good stuff. You know, the South Vietnamese were down way low on the totem pole for getting equipment, you know, newer stuff replaced as well. But by the time, you know, about 74, and you know, when we were talking, I think they were a pretty, you know, consistent capability. And they dang well better be, because once we made the decision to get out, they were going to have to pull the load.
Oops.
And to me, the biggest tragedy of this whole thing is we made a promise to them. We promised them, you take over the war, we'll provide you the material, and we'll provide you the air support needed to do it. And when we had the final signing of the peace accords, that was the major promise we made to get President to do that. And as soon as, you know, Nixon was out, Congress turned around and said, no more support for the Vietnamese. So that was broadcast right out on international press. Everyone knew it. So North Vietnamese, hey, that's a green light, guys.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to get nothing. And I think if we had lived up to our promise that, you know, I think you would probably have ended up something like Korea. But, you know, I'll be damned if I wouldn't say the South Koreans are a hell of a lot better off than the North Koreans. And the South Vietnamese, I think, even though you can go back, you can kind of visit South, you know, you're not going to find anyone there being able to say anything that goes counter to the government, you know, still.
Let me add to that, because we can contrast Hanoi, Jackie and I and the rest on the tour, Hanoi and Haiphong with Ho Chi Minh City and Saigon, and also Dalat, which was the provincial capital of South Vietnam. We can contrast the attitudes, spirit, and life. North Vietnam is rebuilt, but it's cold. It's like the Russians helped build that city back. And it's a cold place, and we took a tour on these 3-wheel bikes and all that kind of stuff. Saigon, on the other hand, it's a capital, or Ho Chi Minh City, it's a capitalist city. When you get goods from Vietnam, you typically are getting them from Saigon or South Vietnam. I've got shoes, all that kind of stuff. My point is that we saw buildings in Saigon that were 23, 25 stories high, like major cities. Didn't see anything like that in Hanoi. And we went to the hotel where we used to go as advisors, and I forgot the name of the hotel.
Continental.
What is it?
Continental.
Well, the Continental, but that's not the one that's got the elephant on it, and we sat on the deck. Can't remember it. Anyway, it was still there, but that was the tallest building at one time, and that was only about 6 floors. Yes, please.
I was just kind of curious if you experienced discipline problems and drug problems during the first tour
Yeah.
with the 11th ACR, or was that more of that?
Well, a book I've got, which is called Find the Bastards and Pile On, written, that began to happen when I was gone. It started to happen in 68, 69, and they blame, at least Patton blames, we were operating with other forces, and the other forces had the dope. Well, I don't know if I believe that. You know, they wanted to blame another Army unit or somebody else for that. But yeah, I was there. I prosecuted one of my troops for marijuana-laced cigarettes. You know, they put regular tobacco, but they laced it with marijuana. I don't think in my tour it had an effect, but I think it certainly did in late 68, 69, 70, as they were saying, what the hell are we doing here? Let's get high, you know.
That changed everything.
What's that?
That changed everything.
Yeah, it did. It certainly did.
Well, I think the other thing, the first units, when you deploy as a unit, you had the leadership in place that you had back here. You know, they were all pretty senior, they were experienced. You know, so by the time you got to 69, 68, you know, you'd long since gotten to this rotation, individual rotation.
Yeah.
So you no longer had that, you know, more experienced senior leadership You had new guys coming into your unit all the time.
Yeah.
There were guys who've been there close to a year, were rotating out. You know, who knew what the heck?
Yeah, 12 or 13 months was a typical tour, but as people got what we call short-timer attitude, that's, hey, I don't want to deploy right now. I don't want to go out in the field. Maybe I've got 3 months left or 2 months left or weeks, and I don't want to take it in the last days of my tour. So that got a little detrimental. And again, I will say, these soldiers are contemporaries of the people back home that are fussing. And so they didn't necessarily believe that they had a real role to play either, later years. Any other questions? I'm sure your butts are a little sore. You like to stand up and get up.
So before we break up,